All right. Good evening. Good morning. Here today with Andrea Putting, a writer, publisher, podcaster, volunteer, and I would add to that community builder, perhaps. So, good morning from the past. You're in Australia right now. I'm in the US. Would you please share with me tonight's winning lottery tickets?
Oh, I wish I could. I really
Doesn't
wish I
work like
could.
that. Okay.
No, unfortunately not.
Want to keep it all for yourself. I understand. All right. So one of the things when I was looking at your bio was that you do bespoke publishing.
hmm
How does your publishing company work?
Well, many people would say it's a hybrid situation with it's kind of on the level of, well, self-publishing. A lot of people want to go self-publishing, but they don't know what to do, how to do it. So then that's where we come in. And so I call it bespoke because of the work we do is really designing the book. The book is designed so that it fits in with the personality of the author and touches into their story. So it's not just throwing words on a page, it's making the whole book come alive. And so I work with authors to create the feel that they want with their branding. We get the book cover. Our designer designs that and gives them lots of options of what they would like to help them to really pinpoint what the cover's going to look like. And then I work with getting the inside all laid out the way that they feel proud of every page.
Mm-hmm.
And we get the book into being a bestseller. So that's one of the most important things for any new author is to be able to get their book into a best-selling list on Amazon and being able to go to the world and say, hey, I'm a best-selling author. And that kind of gives them an extra layer of credibility when they go searching for speaking gigs or try to promote their book. When they're a bestseller, it really helps them to become known and the
How
people
does
want to read
the
their book.
how do you get someone onto a best-selling list? Is it through going to different genres and subgenres, or what's the secret there? If you care to share.
Yes, it is about finding the right categories on Amazon to promote your book. The book has to be in categories that fit. I often see books that they come up as bestseller, but in some random category that really makes no sense. And I think Amazon, if they catch on with that, you're not going to get anywhere. So you've got to find the category that fits your book, that is a little bit easier for you to get into, as well as whatever categories. So you don't just go for an easy category to get into. You just find those categories that are going to work for your book, that's going to help promote that. And then it also comes down to setting up a launch that is going to get people to buy the book all at the same time to help you to get there. So, we work with a bit of advice on how to do that and help the process along as much as we can from our end. And so we work together to make that happen.
Do you go through like KDP and help people navigate that, or do you have your own program and publishing devices that you use outside of Amazon?
Yeah, we do more than just Amazon. So Amazon we use KDP especially to get up the ebook, get the ebook onto there, get that happening as a bestseller. And saying that, I've also got the hard copy for some people to become bestsellers. But our primary getting that book to start with, we focus on the ebook on KDP. but the publishing network we use for the paperback book, we use a different networks. There's a couple of different networks depending on what the author wants to achieve. So we can use that so that it can get into sellers, internet sellers around the globe. And that's always fun when you look up your book and you find it, for example, in Danish, that on a Danish website, and it's written all in Danish, and you go, "Oh, that's my book." Your book's still in English, but it's available internationally, so we can do that, and also gives it access to libraries and all sorts of things. And using those networks, you can also, with a bit of work, get it into bookshops and wherever. But it gives it a bigger opportunity to move beyond just the Amazon world.
Okay. Do y'all have your own publishing press, or are you using print on demand?
We're using print on demand because who wants to have a stack of books sitting in their shed?
Yeah.
And it's expensive to have a stack of books sitting in your shed, and then you've got to work with that. So getting print on demand makes it a lot easier for authors to handle. And while I'm saying that, I'm thinking I had a client in Singapore, and we found that they couldn't, while we did all our normal process to get it internationally, it was very difficult for them to get the printed copy in Singapore. So then we had to do a lot of research, and I found a print on demand place there where she was able to go and get her 40, 50 books that she wanted at a time to be able to on sell. So where there's a will, there's a way, and we work with the authors to make sure that they get what they want and got their books in their hands.
Okay. When you published your first book, how did you do that?
My first book, that's a whole different story. My first book, I had no idea what I was doing, of course, as new authors don't. And it was a co-authored book with a gentleman who lived in Australia but was Indian. Now, the reason I bring up his nationality is that he went back to India for an extended, which was to be 3 or 4 months. And he arranged the book to be published in India. So me being very raw in the industry of authors and publishers, I just allowed that all to happen. And the book I ended up with was, well, the content is still great. One day I'm going to redo it because the way it looks just doesn't feel right to me, and it's not really given me that experience. But it was published there at a hybrid publishing company, and we had to get a whole lot of books. It wasn't print on demand. It was a whole lot of books had to be printed and shipped and from India, and the whole thing wasn't fun. So when I wrote more books, and I actually had 3 books to publish at the same time after COVID, as you would, that's when I thought, no, I've got to learn how to publish myself. And so then I invested in learning how to publish. So what do I have to do? How can I do this in an effective way for my own books? And then once I did that and I had success, I had beautiful books to present to people, other authors wanted me to help them to publish. And so here I am, someone who works with authors to publish their books.
Okay. Yeah, I like the self-publishing route. My first book I did through a self-publishing house, or a vanity press, I guess is what they call it. I guess that's the derogatory name for it. But it was okay. I didn't know any better, so that's what I went with. But it was, I think, probably $900 US to go through everything with it. And then I realized, the customer for a publishing company like that is not people that buy the books. It's the people that write the books. That's the customer. So
Yes.
I still get calls about that one from back from 2014, where you get the cold calls of people that want to turn it into a movie or put it into a different publisher, and they say how great it is. And then I ask them what the lead character's name is and what the book's about and what they thought of the themes. And nobody has answered that yet. But
No.
then I found KDP and the Amazon ones, and I really like the ease of being able to publish on there, the ease of being able to change it if inevitably you find an error, whether you forgot to put a quotation mark at the end of a quote, or you dropped a word or something that you need to
Yeah.
rearrange. Not really content. You're not changing the outcome of the book, but I mean, you could if you wanted to, but you probably do a second edition on that. And then
Yeah.
being able to deal with the covers and select the size, the type of paper, the markets have changed a lot through Amazon, where you can go worldwide in and out of the Amazon markets now too. And I just found it more convenient, and they do all the self-publishing or the print on demand. So that helped a lot. So I
Yeah.
do enjoy the Amazon publishing part of it. And I think even now, if I had a big publisher come to me and say, we want to make you, we want to print this book for you and send you on a book tour and all that, I'd have to think about it, because I don't want to lose the autonomy, I guess, you have from publishing it yourself. But it'd be interesting just to live that piece of a writer's life, just to see what it's like, just for the experience. But I'm
Yeah.
pretty happy with the self-publishing experience so far.
Yeah. It would be a different experience. One of my authors actually had an offer from a publishing company and then decided not to go with them because of the demands that they were putting on her to the content of her book, that she needed to make all these changes for them, and then she would lose a certain amount of control, and she'd have to just do what they wanted rather than what she wanted. So having that control over your own book is really important. And that's one thing that I do is when I do get the books on KDP, I do put them on the author's create their own account, so that then they can have the control themselves. And I'm happy to sit with my authors and go through how to use this so that they can then make changes when they want to, because it's really important that it's fully in their hands. So I'm just here to support them on the journey.
You probably do well with a book about how to navigate self-publishing through Amazon. I'm sure there's plenty of them out there, but it changes so often. You'd have to
That's
keep
right.
putting out editions just for all the little specifics. How much
Yeah.
time do you spend on a normal week with your publishing company?
Well, I am a multi-potentialite. I have a lot of different things in my week, and one of those is I lose a day. I have a day where I spend with my grandchildren. So there's one day gone, and I have to deal with my elderly mother. So a whole lot of time is kind of scheduled. So in my business, I only have 3 days a week, and I have other things as well. So it depends on the demands at a particular time. It may be two days a week. So
So it's more of a contractor type life, where somebody comes in and says, I need help publishing this book.
Yeah.
And then you just work with them. Okay.
Pretty much, yeah. And of course, I've got to keep up with the latest things with, like you said, KDP changes all the time. So I've got to be constantly on top of that, on what's happening. And that's the thing that I've noticed. Somebody gave me a copy of a program that they had bought, which told you how to publish. And this is back when I started learning what to do. It's kind of like, well, this is all you have to do. And it was like, reality is that that's all out of date. And what you have to do now is completely different. And even what I learned when I was publishing my books, some of that is all out of date. So it's this constant keeping up with the latest developments as well. So while it might be a contract type of work, it's also a lot of keeping up with things, the latest movements of what's happening.
What type of advertising do you do for the publishing part for your company?
A lot of my work comes through referrals. So it's keeping up with those referrals to making sure that I'm on top of mind, top of thought with those people who refer me, and promoting it through that way.
Okay. With your podcasting, when you started podcasting, what kind of podcasting equipment did you use?
I kept it really simple. I had one of those things that I'd gone around looking, what do I need to do? What equipment do I need? And I came down to listening to talking to other people who had podcasts. So basically, have a microphone, a good quality microphone. This isn't the first one I started with. I changed over to a Rode one, which is much better than what I had originally. And software like Audacity, which is actually a free program. And to start with, that was all I had. But I was very fortunate in that I had released my first couple of podcasts, and I thought they sounded okay. And then a friend of mine listened to them who was a sound engineer. And he goes, "You need help. Invite me over for a meal and I'll give you some advice." So he sat with my computer with it and gave me all the guidelines of what I needed to do to get the best out of my sounds. So I was very fortunate with that. And so I just follow his advice. And now in the past 12 months, there's so much AI that's happening that can help you to do a lot of this work. I haven't explored it fully because I actually ended up taking last year off podcasting because I had so much other stuff on, and I had a whole lot of family stuff that caused me to actually take 3 months off work completely. So this year I'm going to get back into podcasting, and I'll be using a variety of different AI systems that have come up that are helping me to get them. Not so much actually some of the work, I'm just thinking, I think there's about 4 different programs that I'm looking at that can help me make life a little bit easier for a podcaster, because as you know, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. You can't just sit on here for an hour and have a nice chat. You've got to put all the other stuff together.
Why did you start podcasting?
It was a message that I wanted to explore. My podcast is Social Mission Revolution. So I was very interested in what it means to have a social mission in our lives. What was the difference it made to people and to business? And that all started because I started my own social mission, Chocolate and Coffee Day for Religious Harmony. And so that was all about bringing people together to break down barriers that divide community. And so while that's one thing, starting that and putting my energy into that changed a lot of my own perspectives. It changed the way that I felt about myself. It gave me something outside of me to focus on when I was not feeling good about who I was. I could focus on other people and getting this happening. So I noticed that there was a big difference in how I felt without a social mission and how I felt with a social mission. So with that, it was kind of, because at the time I was also exploring, well, why don't people like going to work? what is missing in the workplace? And so I kind of pulled these two ideas together and go, well, hey, if businesses are involved in social mission, how would that change the way that people feel about their everyday work? And so the podcast is really an exploration of that, and that just kept me going. And it was a really, talking to a lot of those people was so inspiring. And I love to go back and listen to some of the podcasts sometimes just to go, oh, hey, there's another great idea. And when I'm feeling like I'm not doing anything, I just listen to other people and go, listen to their ideas and get inspired. So I said, starting the podcast was really that continual exploration of the work that I was already exploring. So it was kind of the background work to, well, how do we do this? Why do we do this? What difference does it make to the business owner, to the employees? And then that became the foundation of two of my books, and a lot of my work is based on that. So it's kind of interesting how it all evolves.
How long did it take you from when you thought about podcasting, when you first thought about it, to when you were actually recording the first one?
I've got to think about that. I may have come up with the idea about 6 months earlier, but once I started really exploring it, it was probably 3 months before I actually started. That's just at a random kind of thinking about it. So, because I wouldn't have just sat there and gone, all right, I'm just going to completely focus on just exploring how to do this. If I had have done that, I could have done it within a couple of weeks, but I've always got other things on at the same time. So
how'd you figure out the format you were going to do your podcast in? Did it change from what it started as?
I pretty much kept it the same, which when I go back and listen, I realize that I did. So my format with it was fairly easy. It was fairly simple format. I developed after the first or second podcast, I started asking everybody this one question. So I would do that at the start. And that question is, if there's just one thing for you to fight for, what would that be? And the reason I ask that question is I find that that's a real foundational thing with social mission. So if you ask that question to people, and then you look at what their social mission is, you can see that that's what's got them into what they're doing. So I would start with that question, and then I would ask them about what their social mission was, and it would just kind of develop as a conversation about that. And I would just come from my natural curiosity about what they were doing. And I never put in a lot of work with as far as researching what they were doing. Some of them I knew what they were doing. I would know the charity or the causes or whatever it was they were doing. But I tried to keep as much as possible a natural curiosity in who they were and what they were about and what they were achieving. So we had this conversation that just led that kind of life. And I would have that closing question of, what advice do they have for somebody? It would usually be along the lines, what advice do you have for someone who is wanting to start their own social mission? That would vary depending on the conversation. So sometimes their conversation would lead a certain way, and I would go, well, the question I need to ask is, what advice would you give for whatever it is? So, I had the starting place and the ending place, and the rest of it is just kind of evolution through a conversation.
I understand what the words social and mission mean, but is it something that in Australia is like everybody has to develop one? Or is it, how's that come about? Is it just something that some people say this is going to be a thing I'm going to do? Or is there something more to it, like a more defined social mission movement?
It's not defined. I'd like to think it's a movement. That's why I call it
Okay.
social mission revolution, because I think that it's something that people are more conscious of now. People are more aware, and businesses are moving more in that direction than they used to be. So they're looking for that something outside of themselves that gives them more inspiration, that makes them feel like life is worthwhile. So it's not a formalized thing, although I see it in some organizations. They've got to have a CSR, corporate social responsibility, and in some countries that's mandated, which is kind of good but kind of not, because then people just tick off the boxes and they don't really get involved in what's happening. So I believe it's more of a conscious, people were looking for a more conscious way of living.
Is it something like, because I haven't heard social mission before, but maybe that's because I'm over here. Is it something related to social justice or diversity, equity, and inclusion, or is it a different thing than that? If some businesses have to have it, is it along those lines?
Yeah, I to be honest, I do have to explain what I mean by social mission. Some people don't quite grasp what I'm talking about.
Especially
So
the Yanks.
yeah, not necessarily, but social mission is about having a mission in your life or in your business that is about community, society. So it could be about equality. It could be about in the environment. It could be about social justice. It's about being consciously aware of something else, another purpose besides making money, another purpose besides having life, having fun in your life, another purpose besides earning money. It's about doing something that is socially good. So it could be a charitable organization. It could be, like I said, environmental. It could be, so many things.
So is it more like community outreach, or is there a section in government that says this is the social mission segment of government, and we need to make sure that everybody has some sort of defined social mission? Or is it just a thing that people decide to do, not to make light of it, but more like a hashtag type thing where it's like hashtag social mission? I went to the soup kitchen this week to help here.
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
more along those lines. It's more along people wanting to just do something good.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you were doing your podcast, how did you find guests for it? How'd you schedule them?
Yeah. So I found a whole lot of other resources of late of how you can find podcast guests. Generally speaking, when I started, I went through my list of who's who that I knew that were involved. So it was a lot of my friends and friends of friends that I already knew that were doing things. So then I was putting out onto social media, who do you know that has a social mission? And I just kept my ears open. And I did use a couple of times. I went on to a service that asks for leads, so that reporters use. Say, hey, I'm after guests for my podcast who have a social mission. And I would get a whole lot of people from that and then work through those. And sometimes you do that and you end up with enough people for months.
Did you try to schedule them out into the future, or how did you try to get them scheduled and then recorded and then published within a certain time? Or was it more of, let me get them all scheduled and then I'll just decide when I have space to publish them?
A lot of it, well, of course, it depends on what time I had available for myself to actually do them.
Right.
So sometimes I might have scheduled a couple per week, but most of the time most of the time I just scheduled in one a week and I would deal with that. I know a lot of other people just get them all done all at once. But like I said, it depends on what your schedule is. For me, my schedule was that I had time to do one a week at the time. So that's what I was doing. There were times that I would have 2 or 3 backlogged for whatever reason. It may be because I was trying to schedule someone that I had to move around my schedule to fit them in and things like that, or that I might have been going away, or I just needed to get them done. But most of the time, I just kept a schedule that was easy for me to maintain, so that it was always the calendar that I put out would never accept more than 2 or 3 in 1 week, because I knew that that was all that I could manage.
Okay.
So it's being very clear about your own time, your own energy that you're able to do, because once you cross those lines into your own energy of what's available to you, then you're going to burn yourself out. And so I've learned that I have to be very conscious of that fact, of not just trying to push through things. So, yeah.
It's that adjustment period. One of my biggest stresses when I started was, how can I remain consistent and put out at least one a week? And I started similar to how you did. Well, probably exactly the same, which is people I knew and people they knew. And then I found that the couple of online places, matchmaker.fm, matchmaker.com is a different thing, but matchmaker.fm is people that have podcasts looking for guests and guests that are looking for podcasts. And I like that platform and I get a lot of people from that. But even still with that, I don't know which success rate of when I contact people versus when if they actually do a show is probably around 50% of, you put out for every 10 people you contact, you get maybe 5 that will do the show.
Yeah.
And how did you find that with dealing through either the leads generator or through another online way of getting guests?
Yeah,
What was your
there's always,
success rate?
when I reached out to most of the people I reached out to, I got, because it was very niche. It's very niche.
Okay.
It was a very niche podcast. I'm looking at expanding it a little bit for this year, but I'll see how that goes. But it's very niche, so that most of the people that I wanted to speak to were happy to come onto the podcast, because they don't get a lot of opportunity to talk about their charitable outreach of their businesses, or it might be they've founded an organization or something and they want to share about that. So most of them were pretty good with that. There was always some that weren't, though, or you would have trouble. You try and schedule them in and they were just too hard.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, the people who contacted me through these different platforms were often not suitable. You'd look at what they were saying about who they were and what they were, and you would go, yeah, that's not what I've asked for. And then some people would send you a 5-page document or something and say, oh, go and watch my video. And it's like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
If you can't tell me what it is that you have to share with me in 1 or 2 paragraphs, then I'm sorry. I don't have time for that. So
I wonder how many people on those look for a show and then say, okay, this is the show I think fits my topic. And then they request that versus just send out a mass message to 50 shows and then see what they get. Oftentimes on those, I don't get responses from people. So you look at the person's profile on one of those and you go, okay, this is a person that for me that talks about creativity or content creation. So that covers a whole lot of things. And
Mm.
then I look at their profile, see what kind of stuff they have. Maybe if I have time, follow them on whatever, social media stuff they have listed, and then send a personalized message to them asking them if they wanted to be on the show. So it is a little disheartening when you don't get people respond, especially when you've looked into them so much and you're like, oh, I really would like to talk to this person,
Yeah.
and just get nothing. But the success rate on matchmaker.fm is much better than people that I would just contact from Instagram or X or wherever else and try to get them to be on the show. And then you have the people that in real life, which I probably 75% success rate on that when you talk to people about it. And if they seem interested, then you offer it to them. And then sometimes you hear from them again and sometimes you don't. But I didn't know if that was a usual occurrence, like the 50-50 success rate. But it sounds like you're doing a lot better. So that's good. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes, well, I'll
When
see where
you
it takes me this year.
when you do your podcast, how do you publish it? Do you at how do you publish it? Let's go with that.
I was publishing on Buzzsprout, so then that would be taking it to all the different places that it needed to go to.
Okay.
I was quite happy with that. However, I've recently moved them to the Spotify channel, mainly because I wasn't publishing, and it was like, well, this is costing me money, and I'm just kind of saving myself some time, some finances. So that's something I need to relook at as I go back into publishing podcast. And it's always a very easy thing to do once you find you're interested. Once you're positive you're going to do this, there's easy channels that you can get your podcast in. And I found that while people were trying to sell me things like, get your podcast on all these different channels, get it on Apple, get it on Spotify, whatever, I actually found that all I needed to do was to go onto Buzzsprout and I put it up there, and next thing I knew it was on everything. So as long as you're following the rules according to all these different organizations, you can get it up. You just, as long as you're being consistent, you get up 2 or 3 podcasts and it will be accepted into those different podcast arenas.
Yeah, I've had pretty good experiences with Spotify and YouTube. I do worry about one day YouTube saying you can't say this on there or you get a strike for something. I haven't had that yet. And I don't think I talk about is controversial topics that they would be worried about. But when you read those agreements, like actually read the agreement with YouTube and Spotify, you start to wonder, of course it's their platform and they can say whatever they want to not go on there. So it's all goes back to that consistency part of wanting to be able to put something out every week and it not be blocked by somewhere.
Yeah.
When you do your advertising for it, did you advertise your podcast anywhere else or have a website for it?
Yeah. So I didn't pay for any advertising. I have it Social Mission Revolution podcast, socialmissionrevolution.com, where I would have my podcast all listed, and I promoted it through social media constantly.
Okay.
So, and now with AI, when I go back to doing it, it's a whole lot easier. It's a whole new game of getting your podcast transcribed, put them through AI, create all of your social media post and everything that you need. It's so much easier. It's just finding the time to do it all, isn't it?
Yeah. And what do you think you learned? Like if you had to tell somebody what the best part of podcasting, best and worst part of podcasting was, or maybe not worst, but just part that took up most of your time that you would not do if you could hire a staff to do, what's your best and worst for podcasting?
The best is, of course, doing the podcast. It's spending that time with someone and having the conversation and finding out who they are and what it's all about. That part I love. What I would gladly turn over to somebody else is everything else.
Nice.
So especially any editing that needs to be done. You'd always try not to have to edit, but there are times when you have to edit. And there was one podcast in particular that took me 2 weeks to edit. So I'd never do that again. So the editing and the social media, while AI helps a lot, it still takes a lot of my time. I did have someone helping me with that when I got to the point that I had someone helping me do that for a while. So those things that take a lot of the time are the things that I want to just go, here you go. Just do this. Just take this now. I've done the fun bit. You go do that bit.
Yeah, the social media part of it and the creating the clips and all that takes the most time, I think. So that would be like your pre and post production, and it is the thing that if I could hire a staff, I would get them to do it. But you also miss out. Maybe it's a good and bad, because I like going through Instagram and X and seeing all the people that I've followed, that I've talked to on the show, or I'm following to try to see if they'll be on the show, or just other people I've met through podcasting. I like being able to follow them and see what they're doing. So that's good. And I've cut down a lot on the amount of clips I post, because I went up on the amount of shows per week that I try to do 2 or 3 postings a week versus one with 6 clips. So now I have 3 shows with 2 clips each. And I think the clips at the beginning were important because you get to see, I didn't watch the whole podcast over again, but you mark those times either on the recording or just write down the times of things that you're like, I think that's going to be a good clip. And you get better, I think, at still talking to people, but also making those notes of, well, this would be good for kind of summing up what the conversation was about, or getting people interested to look at the whole conversation. So I like that part of learning of podcasting, and then talking to the people. I agree is the best part, is doing the podcast and talking to people.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you say about you'd miss those special points, that is something that I found when I had someone else doing that, is that what they would come up with as for clips wasn't always the best part.
Yeah.
They didn't kind of get what I was wanting to focus on, and they would come up with stupid things, and it was like, I'm paying you for
People
this.
are different. That's the issue. Yeah. I wonder how an AI does clips. Like if it just looks for breaks in conversation and then says, okay, here's a 30-second that has a break and then another break. Let's do a clip out of that. Like, I wonder how AI does it. I haven't used them for any of that.
I have tried that on some of the podcasts that I've been on. I've put a transcript into AI, and I've asked it for social media post. What is the best quotes? What is the best? I asked, but still, you could still miss that part. So it's like, well, you get the transcript, then you still need to read through it yourself just to see if there is something that really stands out to you as being the highlight of that
Yeah.
recording.
How did you decide to do? I've looked at some of your podcast on Spotify. That's where I look at most of mine, Spotify and then
Yep.
YouTube some. How'd you decide to do an audio versus a video podcast? And do you have a video? Is there a video element that I'm just not getting on Spotify?
Yeah. Well, I've only just discovered that you could do audio on Spotify towards the end of 2022, which was when I did the last one. It was like, okay, that's something that I need to look at when I go back into podcasting, which I thought I would be kind of like start another season last year. But like I said, I got sidewiped. So I didn't do them on. So the video element is not on Spotify. They are on YouTube though.
Oh, okay.
So then that was a whole other thing that I would then leave them for a couple of months and then put them on YouTube to kind of give them a whole new lifespan. So then I think the editing options are better now than they were when I had done it, because I'd record on Zoom, I'd get the audio, I'd get the video. So then it was, yeah. And I know of other options for editing which make that whole life a lot easier. So I'm looking forward to exploring that a little bit more to see what magic I can come up with.
Yeah, it's definitely easy to get lost in the sauce on the editing and all the technical side of podcasting to where you're like, well, let me get the light right. Let me do this. Let me do that. I'm not sure if that's a perfectionist mindset or a procrastinator's mindset, because it's just, well, I'm going to do all these things. And then you never get around to doing it because you have this big barrier to entry, or if there's some other thing that I'm missing on it. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, I think perfectionism and procrastination go hand in hand.
Let's talk about writing. What was the first thing that you remember writing?
First thing I remember writing. Oh, I'm trying to go back to my childhood, think what I remember writing. Yeah. The thing is, I never saw myself as a writer until I was late 30s, maybe 40. So before that, my writing was all pretty much just what I had to write with school.
Do you think the kid you thought about being a writer and then it just got lost in the shuffle of life and then you picked it back up later? Or do you think did it occur to you before you started in the 30s or 40s?
No, I would never would have never thought of being a writer, never thought that I had that kind of ability to write. I remember at high school sitting in my final year at high school, sitting in a class where we were told to write an essay and just sitting there writing absolutely nothing. So although I could write an essay sometimes, but I never thought of myself as being excelling in writing at all. Whereas now I see that if I'm not writing, I'm not really developing. So it's really an interesting thing, because obviously you don't just pull out the talent of the writing talent would have been there, but it wasn't something that I ever explored. So yeah, I just find it fascinating to think about that it just never occurred to me. I went back and looked at my school reports lately and to kind of see whether that was there. Not particularly. Not particularly.
What do you think drives you to write now or keeps you writing?
It's a need for expression for me. It's connecting in with the consciousness that's within me, because I have a very active mind. My mind just is it's really hard. I'm not someone who can really meditate very
Mm.
much into spirituality, but I can't meditate because my mind's just too busy. And for me, writing is the way that I bypass that. So it's kind of tricking my brain, is what I think of it as.
Mm.
It's tricking the brain to go, all right, I'm doing something physically. I'm physically writing, whether it's on my computer or by hand. I'm physically doing something. So my mind's okay. It's okay. I can let the other things come through. I can let the thoughts come through. I can let the process happen. And some of the expression that comes out of reading something that I wrote 2 years ago this morning, and I'm thinking, this is what I need to be doing. This is where I need to be, is writing this
Mm.
this way that I write, where I am completely detached from my brain, my everyday thinking that just drives me crazy. I can sit and allow the flow of life to come through. It's it's very much staying in contact with that part of myself that the busyness can forget about.
Yeah. What's your favorite medium for writing?
Uh, Mostly, I find it best just to sit at the computer and write. I've I've written by hand, and sometimes that's good, but then I go, "Well, now I've got to transcribe that onto onto a computer
Hmm.
to be able to use it." But I can sit and write on computer, and just my hands move fairly quickly. My handwriting has never been great. Maybe that's what that kind of might have destroyed my whole writing thing when I was at school, because teachers couldn't read my writing.
Mm.
So just sitting at the computer and just allowing that, because I can type pretty quick, and that seems to be a way of keeping my focus. I do
You
explore a little bit from time to time with writing in notebooks and whatnot, just for the fun of it,
hmm
but mostly
Yeah,
computer.
I like the idea of the notebook, and I used to, I guess, more collect notebooks than actually write of them, but it would make you think
Yep.
about writing. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, I do that too. I got so many notebooks, it's ridiculous.
yeah, they're fun to look at, and then you just got to go, okay, now I'm gonna write this, and then there was even a time where I remember printing things out and then like taping them on the pages of those notebooks and thinking that's not quite the same, not quite the same. But what how often do you write? Do you have like a schedule that you set up to do it, or how do you make time for writing?
Mm. Generally, I don't have a schedule. Last year, everything just went out of whack, and I know that because my writing just really suffered. So before that, it was very much when I sit down at my computer at the morning, just open a blank script page and just write whatever comes out. And there's some crap that came out, but there's also some brilliance. And more more often it was good stuff. So I found that that's the best way for me to write, is just to do that. I sat and I was doing the what do you call it? The artist way, and you sit there and write 3 pages first thing in the morning, and I struggle with that. I haven't gone back to see what I wrote, which I need to do. But sitting writing 3, I'm too my mind's going, "I've got to get up and do this, I've got to do that," and I was just like, "Yeah." But if I've done everything that just leads me into I spend some time in the morning reading spiritual stuff and just allowing that to process, and then I can come to the computer and just sit before I start doing anything else and just allow whatever to evolve. That works best for me. However, if I need to write, because I'm writing a book or an article, that kind of happens at a different time. That's kind of a different set of time. It's like I have to clear my mind of my day before I can sit down and write. So otherwise I'm sitting there writing thinking, "Oh, I've got to do this email, I've got to do this, I've got to do that." So I really need to get all that stuff done before I can just clear my space and sit and write. So if I'm writing articles or if I'm working on a book or something like that, it's often in the afternoon that I'll sit and do that. So it's kind of interesting that a lot of people say, "Oh no, you get up at 3 o'clock and write." It's like, I'm not doing that. Although
Yeah.
I have, but that's kind of a random thing when I'm in the middle of the night and I can't sleep and this great thought comes to me. It's like, "Ooh, I'll go write that."
Are there any things that make you think or kind of get you in the mindset of writing more than others? Like for me, it's if I'm running or swimming, then that's where my mind seems to have the ideas more readily available. But is there
Yeah,
anything like that?
so yeah, I get that. Going for a walk in nature is often a way of doing that. And one of the things, if anyone was to read all of my writings, even my book, if I read my books, I'm very much inspired by the view that just outside of my window, I have this enormous elm tree that I'm just looking at in the rain at the moment, outside of my window. And I have written about this tree, I don't know how many times. Like I said, it's in
Mm.
all of my books. It inspires me. So sometimes I can be completely blank and I'll just sit here and I'll start writing about the tree and then something else will evolve. So nature very much inspires me. So I might be sitting here and see the raindrops falling, or I might see a spider's web connected to the tree, or various things. So they're the kind of things that can spark my writing into. I might write back something completely different. So, but the elm tree makes me think about connection as well, and does the leaf on this side of the tree know about the leaf on the far top of the tree? Things like that just kind of spark ideas of
Mhm.
our our connection in the world. So yeah, nature.
Do you find yourself writing notes throughout the day just about random things for writing later? Or like if a thought occurs and you either put it in your notes on your phone or have a notebook you write it down in?
Yeah, well, if a random thought comes to me that I think is worth exploring, that is a phrase. Sometimes a phrase will come to me that I really like, something that could be used for a title for a book, or yeah, just random thoughts that come. They've got to be written down, because as much as I have a really good memory, and as much as I think that I'll remember them, there's just too much going on in your brain.
Yeah.
And to remember the phrase exactly as you've thought of it, you go to write it down 2 days later and it's like, "What was that?"
Mm.
And it just has lost that magic that it had in that moment.
Yeah.
So writing it down all the time.
I've forgotten enough good phrases and ideas that I now will stop what I'm doing if I can and write those down.
Yeah,
Just because I know maybe they come back by, but maybe they don't. And you're always like, man,
yeah,
maybe you might use them. They might just sit on a list somewhere, on a page somewhere, in a document until one day you come back to it and it's like, oh, that's exactly what I was missing. Like if you're if you're looking for that inspiration, certainly going through those occurrences helps.
Yeah, yeah. So there's some that I wrote down over a year ago that I was thinking about the other day, and I'm thinking that I wrote down a whole heap of phrases that I thought would be a great title for a book or something, and I'm thinking, "Oh, where are those? I'm gonna look those up and just see where those ideas take me now."
Yeah.
See what,
It's interesting how you can write down just a couple words and months or longer from then go back and read them, and it reminds you exactly this whole bigger idea that you had.
Mm.
Sometimes you don't know what it means, especially if you write it in the middle of the night and you're like, this is good, this is going to be gold, and then you wake up in the morning and you have no idea, it's almost gibberish, but maybe it comes out, it makes sense later on when you pair it up with something else. But with your spiritual mind, where do you think that ideas and creativity come from then? What do you think the origins of that are?
Oh, that's the question, isn't it? If I could answer that, maybe there's $1,000,000 book in that one.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's really about that consciousness, that inner consciousness that is connected to all things that, uh, while we have that individual consciousness, as the tree reminds me of, like each leaf, it has its individual consciousness. It's still the one tree. So I believe that we all have that connection, that inner connection to the greater oneness, to the greater spirit, and it's in connecting with that we are able to come up with those ideas and that inspiration. And we all have our different ways of connecting with that, and we all have our different connections to that. So I might connect on it on these topics, and you connect on it on a different whole lot of different topics. So it's an interesting thing to explore, and part of the difficulty with understanding that is because we all do have those different insights. We all do have the different perspectives. We all do see it in a different way. The leaf on the bottom branch can't see the tree the way that the leaf on the top of the tree sees it. So, connecting with that inner consciousness is really the one consciousness that we all have that connection with, that the ideas sprout from.
Have you done any collaborative writing?
Yeah, I have, like, my first book was a co-author book, which, well, I basically wrote it with
All right. So a bit of a technical difficulty there. Now we're back, and we were talking about writing collaborations in your first book.
yes. So, yeah, I had a co-author, and so we were working with concepts together. So it was my writing with with a lot of the concepts that we had come up with together and the stories that he had given me to put into the book. So it was a collaboration with all of my writing. So that was one way of doing the book. And so a lot of people work that kind of way anyway, so that's normal. And I did do one collaborative book, which is called I Am Possible, and there was 21 other writers in that. And I had the honor to be the first writer, first story in the book, which is great. So I've had a lot of offers to do other collaborative books, and I wanted to really stop and look at that and see, well, what is the point of the collaborative books? So for me, as a publisher, I'm looking at them from a different aspect of how I can make them more than just a vanity book, which I think a lot of collaborative books are. Because they don't really do anything besides sell a few copies to those people, their friends and family have to buy the book. So I want to look at how a collaborative book can be more of have a bit longer shelf life.
I mean,
So I have a few ideas.
I've made tens of dollars from selling books to my mom, so I understand that. But the collaborations, I guess there's some different types of collaborations. One where you're like, you have the other writer and you're going back and forth and the writing mixes together so much. And then another way is where you have different sections or different topics that are kind of just a bringing together of a bunch of different viewpoints, but each in their own little sections.
Yeah.
What type of collaborative is that? The type of collaborate you've done, or do you have the type where you've mixed in together with the other writer?
Yeah, the one that I did was just solely 21 different stories, so it wasn't mixed in. So I think the ones that have greater shelf life have more mixed in, and there's one that I'm working on at the moment where I'm looking at getting people's short stories, because I think when you've got long stories, you kind of lose the balance of it. But stories of joy, so that people, when they're feeling like they need a bit of a lift in life, they can pick up the book and read a story that's going to help them think about where they might find some joy in their life. And so there's other books that ideas that I'm looking at with collaborative about working more towards a goal in the end of the book, not just in the storyline, so that there's a purpose of the whole. Each chapter flows on from each other. Each author has something to add to the previous authors and to the other authors, so that it's more
than an anthology. And
more than an anthology. Yeah.
when I was looking through your biographical information, you had some things in there about themes in your writing, and that change was a big theme in it. What is your relationship with change?
Change. We have to change. We have to be willing to look at what it is that we have in our lives and what it is we need to let go to allow the flow of something new to come. If we don't allow something new to come, then we have no growth, we have no development. So change is an essential part of our being. So I like to look at how we can develop new ideas, how we can create something new from taking all that we've experienced, all that we've learned, and stripping that down to create something new. So our limitations in life are our greatest opportunities to develop something new. So how can we do that? How can we look at the future in a different way? How can we see what we have now and develop that into something greater? A lot of people fear change, but I think it's a case of doing it in a way that where every person is involved in change. The fear of change is a fear of unknown, but if everyone's involved in it, then there's not as much to fear because people feel like they've got a little bit more control in something when they can see that they've had the input in it, that they can see that they've got something to benefit from it. Yeah, it's an interesting topic to play with.
All right. So I'm always amazed when technology works, especially when we're on different continents. So we were talking about your relationship with change, and I don't remember after all of the sound on and off that exactly where you were in it, but you were talking about the importance of being able to change so you can move forward. And I think my next question off of that was going to be, with your idea of change and learning from experience, how do you use that mindset in your volunteering, and what kind of volunteering do you do?
The thing with I think with change when it comes to volunteering is always being ready to adapt. And I think any organisation that can't adapt to where people are and what they're doing is not going to survive. So we have to be always willing to see the better way of doing things, a better way of integrating whatever it is we're doing. So the volunteering that I do is part of my volunteering is telling people that they should volunteer.
Okay.
Because one of my books is I tell people, you want to volunteer? This helps you to find what you're to volunteer about. So one of my volunteering gigs is that I am a community chaplain with the emergency ministries in Victoria. So we go to different events where there is bushfires, floods. At the moment, we've got a lot of people out dealing with floods because we've got floods happening where I live at the moment. And we will be tasked with helping people to emotionally and spiritually deal with those kind of situations, just being the personal support. While there's a lot of support organisations that deal with the physicalities of the situation about where you're going to live, where you've got clothes to wear, the environmental disaster of things, who's dealing with the emotional, personal support. And that's the kind of work that I do as a volunteer, is going to these situations. And we do an awful lot of door knocking, just checking on people, making sure that they're okay after they've been through a emergency situation, a traumatic experience, after there's been some of these things that happen where multiple people are killed in car accidents and things like that. We turn up at those when people are on vigils and things that just help to be support kind of people behind those emergency situations. So that's one of the things I do. I also do a lot of church work in leadership kind of areas and various different things that come up with that, which constantly keeps me busy. And I'm always open for one-off events, because those kind of things keep me my stable things that I do. And then I can also, if there's one-off opportunities for me to go and volunteer to assist somebody, assist an organisation, I will take those opportunities when I can clear the space to do so, because I think they're really important to keep us focused on away from our own problems, our own self. I've had people, after I've spoken about the importance of volunteering, come to me and say, it saved my life. Volunteering literally saved my life because they were on a downward spiral and they couldn't possibly think about how to look after themselves or how to deal with their own life, but they could think about somebody else. They could think about how I could help somebody else, how I could do something for somebody else, and that lifted them out of their desperation and despair. So, like I said, one of my volunteer things is talking about volunteering.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Just drum up the business somehow.
Yeah.
In your other information, or your bio information, it talked about living in a world of compassion and harmony. Like that's what you're trying to move towards. What do you think living in a world like that would be like?
Well, it'd be nice to live where people care about each other and aren't thinking about how to get on top of to be on top or to have the most, but how can we all work together? How can we all live and grow together? So one of the things that I missed out on saying though I was volunteering is my major thing is chocolate and coffee day and chocolate and coffee breaks. So they're my major things that I do that I don't charge for. So it's kind of like my own social mission, and I leave that out. Awesome. So when I look at that in relation to the question that you've just asked, what is it like to live in a community of harmony? That's one of the things that I do with chocolate and coffee breaks and chocolate and coffee days, to encourage people to connect with each other, to listen to each other's stories, to understand who that other person is. So if we are living more compassionately in a more harmonious environment, then that's what it takes. That's what, when people will stop and will notice that somebody is different. They don't understand what that person is about, what that person's doing. They don't like what that person is, or whatever it is, to stop and think about that and go, well, who is that person and why are they doing that? Hey, let's have a conversation. Let's find out why. Let's find our similarities rather than our differences, and we can focus on that. So, okay, it can be idealistic, but it's also a place where those opportunities to grow and develop come from. It's the opportunities where change does come into play, because by listening to other people, by being open to other people's ideas, then we can embrace some of what they're doing and they can embrace some of what we're doing, and we create something that fits for everybody.
That's good. I like that. What are the best ways for people to be able to follow your writing and podcasting and all your other work?
I'm easy to find because I'm the only Andrea Putting in the world. So if you go to my website, andreaputting.com or .com.au, you can find all of the bits and pieces that I do, and it will lead you into the podcast, to chocolate and coffee breaks, into my books, into my publishing. My publishing company is Putting Words. So those kind of things. So if you just search for my name, you'll find me.
Okay. In the show notes, I will put your website and then the puttingwords.com and the chocolateandcoffeebreaks.com.
Fabulous.
If there are other links you would like, then we can talk about it after we finish recording. But those are the three, I think, that can get to pretty much all your stuff. I like your website. When a person goes to it, in my experience from the US, it takes a little bit longer for the site to load for some reason. I'm not sure why, but it's a little different than how quick it pops up. Maybe that's just because of the distance or going through different servers, but it does have you have to put on the end of it that .com.au to be able to get to it.
Yeah.
Any thoughts in closing?
Well, thank you for your time. We've had an interesting experience with bad weather in where I am and cutting out the internet. That's been fabulous.
Yeah.
it's been a joy speaking to you about, it's always good for us to explore our creativity and where that comes from, and looking at how we can be more creative in our lives. And I find that by listening to podcasts such as this and hearing other people's stories of their creativity, it can spark into us something magical and lead us in new directions. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for all that you do and for being on to talk about it. And I will talk to you on the other side of this, okay?
Thank you.